XXV, comes the dawn. The man that once did sell the lion's skin while the beast lived was killed with hunting him. King Henry V, Act 4, Scene 3. Leonard Posner was a god who walked among men. He was tall, tanned, and distinguished-looking, with a blow-dried silver-tipped mane and a nose job to die for. Leonard Posner was the fearless and hard-hitting on-the-spot correspondent for Fox News, the man who's always one step ahead of the action. Arguably the biggest prima donna in a television news industry where prima donnas leaped and twirled in front of every camera, Posner traveled to the world's hot spots with an entourage that sometimes outnumbered the rest of the press party put together. Besides a whole team of sound men, camera crew, advance men, film editors and mixers, as well as a phalanx of private security goons from Blackwater. That entourage included his own personal makeup artist, a 200 per cut hairdresser, his own personal chef, a scriptwriter, and a crew of roadies to manhandle and set up his plush air-conditioned trailer in any locality in the world from the Iraqi desert to the Oregon woods. Then there was his personal assistant, a stunning blonde with the IQ of a can of Cheese Whiz, who had a special Hollywood-style personal services clause written into her contract. Leonard Posner wasn't just Mr. Fox News. He was Mr. News, period, regarded with some justification as the most well-known, trusted, and admired face in broadcast journalism since Walter Cronkite. His nightly telecast never fell below 100 million viewers. His off-the-cuff op-eds delivered from the field, sometimes under Iranian shell fire or in the middle of rioting. Palestinians had been known to shape national policy, since Chelsea Clinton considered him dreamy and constantly puffed him to her presidential mother. Leonard Posner's salary and bonuses were larger than the budget of a medium-sized American city. His mansion in Beverly Hills had been the scene of week-long orgies of every known form of drugs, sex, and madness that had reduced the most jaded Hollywood studio executives and corporate CEOs to respectful awe and wonder. Right now, media divinity Leonard Posner was leaning over the rail of an obsolescent old car ferry, puking his guts out into the dark water of the North Pacific in the darkness before dawn. His colleagues of the Fourth Estate were struggling with might and main to keep straight faces. Does any man or woman among us dare to catch this on our phone cam and slip it surreptitiously onto the internet? Asked Mark Hastings from CNN in a whisper. I wouldn't advise it, replied the petite and sassy Sue Loomis from Reuters. Leonard has a lot of strong points, but a sense of humor isn't among them. Be my guest, Mark, if you think a few laughs is worth a lifelong blood feud, and I do mean blood. Those Blackwater thugs are quite capable of beating the crap out of you, or worse, you know. Whenever he goes out partying down in L.A., the paparazzi give him a wide berth. Leonard gives those animals personal bonuses for services rendered, and he can put a hurt on you in more ways than one. Haven't quite found your sea legs yet, eh, Leonard? Called Randy Jensen from McClatchy Media. Fuck off, moaned Posner. This tub was meant to haul tourist SUVs to Catalina Island in those nice balmy waters down south, not sail this far north on the open ocean, remarked Bill Baker from the Associated Press, an ex-Navy man who thereby claimed the status of resident expert on all things nautical. Glad we won't be trying to wallow this hog across the Columbia Bar. Hell, we can't even keep up with the rest of the convoy without the tugs. The convoy Baker referred to was a task force of 6 vessels. The media people were standing at the rail of the promenade deck of the U.S.S. Ventura, which had been commandeered from where it lay rusting in mothballs in the Los Angeles Marine Boneyard, and fitted out for this one final mission. The Ventura now contained a little over 300 officers and men of the Federal Anti-Terrorist Police Organization, with full weapons and equipment, as well as over 50 vehicles including transport trucks, Humvees, armored personnel carriers, a staff car for FATPO General Roland Rollins, SUVs for the embedded media party, and of course, Leonard Posner's trailer and the diesel tractor truck that would haul it ashore. The Ventura was moving forward on only a quarter engine power, since she was being towed on 4 12-inch hawsers, 2 each attached to the ocean-going tugboats Josephine P. and Clownfish. The total FATPO force was almost 1,400 men, but the rest were dispersed into 2 Alaska cruise ships, the Ketchikan and the Kodiak Queen, which had also been commandeered by FATPO and converted into troop transports. Escorting the whole motley flotilla was a 378-foot Coast Guard cutter, the U.S.S. Frederick J. Higby, a ship that was named after a former chairman of the House Armed Services Committee who had managed to cut the Coast Guard an extra hunk of federal budget money some years before. "You know, I've always prided myself on being a feminist," said Sue Loomis, "but I have to admit that damned rubber life raft scares me, and I want one of you big strong men to help lower me down into it." "Piece of cake, Sue," laughed Baker. "The sea's nice and calm. It's not a life raft, though. It's an inflatable motor launch. It's quite seaworthy. You could probably sail back to Oakland in it if the weather stays decent." "I still don't understand why they won't let us get into the boat first before they lower it down," said Loomis with a pout. "Just to make sure there's no accidents," said Hastings. "If that launch were to tip over in the davits, $1 million worth of sound and camera gear might end up in Davy Jones's locker. Frankly, it's not your no doubt sweet little ass Rollins is concerned about, it's the gear. Got to have the gear if his moment of glory is going to be caught and preserved for posterity. You got all your pre-landing footage, or notes, or whatever you ink people do?" "I've got at least 4 hours on tape and digicam of Roland expounding on how he's going to smash terrorism in the Pacific Northwest at a single blow," said Sue Loomis. "He's the greatest military genius since Napoleon, of course. In case you haven't gotten the message yet." "Oh, we get it," grunted Hastings. Leonard Posner finally finished vomiting over the rail and staggered up to them. "Jesus, Leonard, pop a breath mint or something," yelled Sue as the ship rolled and the world-famous anchorman lurched toward her. "Just for that, I won't sleep with you this trip," growled Posner savagely. "The hell of it is, he really means that as a punishment," Sue told the others, rolling her eyes in disgust. "When the hell are we going to land?" demanded Posner of Bill Baker. "Oh, probably about an hour or so," said Baker. "Roland wants to do it right as the sun comes up, so the cameras can film him splashing ashore bathed in Mother Nature's warming glow from above. Sure, he doesn't want to strip off and float in on a clamshell like that Venus painting from the Renaissance? Botticelli or Michelangelo or whoever the fuck? Put in Seth Goldstein from MTV. That would sure make my job easier." "Yeah, we only have to report this dog and pony show as an infotainment news story," said Hastings. "You have to make a rock video out of it for Teens Against Spuckies or whatever. What are you going to call it? Badass Brother Wets His Pants?" "It's for Youth Against Hate," said Goldstein. "I don't know what I'm going to call it. Democracy's Sword of Freedom or some such poop. Unless Rollins doesn't like it since he got full creative control from MTV. You know Rollins won't let me use the Dead Chickens for my opening? He insists on the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing Battle Hymn of the Republic, of all the antiquated crap. Even insists on playing it on the speakers as he's coming ashore. This from a black guy, yet. The ghosts of Pat Boone and Kate Smith haunt this vessel. The battle hymn I can see," responded Posner. "Congressman Rollins, or General Rollins, I mean, is trying to expand his base beyond the south side of Chicago. And that means appealing to the blue-haired country club set in both parties. Very symbolic and American and all that. And of course the fact that Roland is the descendant of slaves who were freed in the war the song was written to glorify will add a bit of poignancy." "Okay, that part I get. But has anyone seriously tried to talk him out of the MacArthur impersonation with the hat and the shades and the corncob pipe? Does he really not understand that he will be making himself look damned ridiculous? Anyway, it's been done before. Like most Americans will even remember who Douglas MacArthur was," snorted Hastings. "Most of our wonderful viewers have difficulty remembering what they had for breakfast yesterday." "That's Rolly's whole life," said Sue with a shrug. "He's always been out to prove that anything a white man can do, a black man can do better, and Rolly Rollins can do better still. It's gotten him re-elected for 6 terms in Chicago, until he resigned to take over FATPO. Now he wants to add anti-racist war hero to his resume." "This is not a war, Ms. Loomis," Posner corrected her. "This is a law enforcement action against hate criminals." "Well, he is going to try and run for president," commented Baker. "Rolly can dream on," said Sue. "That seat in the Oval Office is Chelsea's and the whole world knows it. And when Chelsea's done, we've got a couple more Bushes waiting in the wings. I don't know why we even bother to have elections anymore, since the White House has become a kind of timeshare for 2 families. Did anybody ever figure out what the hell happened to Dawson Zucchino?" asked Maxwell Zevon from Rolling Stone. "The son of a bitch had my stash." "He probably smoked it all, or he was out getting drunk or laid or both. And he slept in and missed the boat, literally, replied Sue Loomis with a sigh. Or he just got tired of being embedded. What do you want to bet that jackass drove down here by car from Portland, probably had a completely uneventful trip and stayed plastered all the way, and he's going to meet us on the goddamn beach with a thermos of coffee and Jack Daniels. Jesus, I can't wait to get this stupid photo shoot over with. Once we get ashore, I don't care if I'm supposed to be embedded or not. I'm finding a Holiday Inn and I'm getting a nice hot shower. Of course, I could change my mind and share that shower with you, leered Posner, leaning against the rail unsteadily. Fuck off, Leonard, said the Reuters woman mildly. On the bridge of the Higby, Captain Merrill Sandoval stood in flawless naval whites, watching the low dark coast go by on the starboard side through her binoculars. Beyond the low white rim of surf, she could see occasional house lights on the bluffs and headlights of vehicles going up and down Highway 101. Steady as she goes, helmsman! There was no need for her to say that, since the trip had been completely uneventful and there wasn't much of any way to go other than steady, but she was extremely conscious of her status as the Coast Guard's senior Hispanic female captain, and she was resolved to present a professional image, sounding nautical and shipshape at all times. Aye, aye, ma'am, replied the petty officer at the wheel, with just enough spit and polish to convey a smidgen of contempt, she thought. She knew that her crew all hated her and were probably conspiring against her, and that the white males among her officers and NCOs were waiting for her to make a single misstep. Or she thought she knew that, and she acted accordingly. She prided herself on running a tight ship, charging her sailors and bringing them up on orders for the slightest infraction. And she was pleased to learn from her XO Lieutenant Hacker that she had a nickname among them, Captain Queeg. Hacker had assured her that it meant a stern but fair disciplinarian. Another subordinate had helpfully informed her that naval tradition held that the original Captain Queeg of legend, whoever he may have been, had made a habit of grinding 2 ball bearings in his hand, a practice she had adopted. Fortunately for the ship's company, Merrill Sandoval didn't watch many old movies on TV. Now Hacker appeared at her side. Signal from Air Dog 1, he told her. The choppers will rendezvous with us on schedule, ma'am. Good, she said. Everything is going according to schedule. Carry on, number 1. She had heard that term on one of the few old movies she ever had watched, and no one ever bothered to explain to her that it was a British naval expression, not an American one. But Hacker seemed disinclined to carry on. He was a lean and grizzled seaman who had come up from the ranks, with a face weather-beaten from many storms that he'd faced on deck, and not in an office or an electronic cubicle. It had taken him a while to make full lieutenant, since he had fought in Iraq for some years in the DNF when the government had run so short of infantry that it stripped Navy and Air Force units to turn them into grunts to patrol the streets of Baghdad and Ramadi. The draft had finally kicked in. Endless cannon fodder had become available for the Ninth Crusade, and Hacker had eventually gotten back on board a ship, minus his left foot. But he retained his combat instincts, and in his mind red flags were out all over the place on this mission. Ma'am, when we reach the LZ, before the FATPO copters arrive, may I suggest that we launch our own helicopter and do a recon of the landing area? He asked respectfully. Not unless General Rollins requests it, said Sandoval. This is his show, and he says he wants to have the copters fly in overhead while he makes his own landing on the beach for the TV cameras. I can understand that. Propaganda is just as important as military action in winning a counterinsurgency, Lieutenant. Yes, ma'am, said Hacker. I don't suggest we do anything to spoil General Rollins' grand entrance. I mean, just buzz the beach once or twice to make sure everything's hunky-dory before we go in. Sandoval laughed, genuinely amused. Good grief, Lieutenant, it's not like we're landing on Iwo Jima or Omaha Beach. This is a photo op, for God's sake, not a real military operation. Although it does have a strategic purpose in that we're inserting a paramilitary force to reassert government control over part of the continental United States. These aren't soldiers we're fighting or even informal militias like in Iraq or Somalia. They're just a bunch of punks who shoot unarmed Hispanic and black people in the back, and who murder movie actors and plant the occasional car bomb. They call themselves an army, but they're not. They're a bunch of inbred hillbilly peckerwoods with black teeth who used to work in Jiffy Lubes and wash dishes for minimum wage before they became terrorists. The toughest people they've got are former members of prison gangs, and they're not good for anything other than shanking each other in the exercise yard. These people are not going to fight over 1,000 armed federal officers and the United States Coast Guard," she concluded with a snort. Hacker debated briefly whether to push it, and decided to change tack. Certainly, ma'am, but I wonder, has General Rollins considered that he is going to be landing at dawn, with the rising sun right in his eyes, and the eyes of his men? Would it be possible for him to maybe wait until the sun gets a bit higher in the sky, do you think?" "Lieutenant, did I not just explain to you that there is no need?" sighed Captain Sandoval with growing impatience. Hacker clenched his teeth but decided to give it one more try. "May I at least order the crew to general quarters, ma'am, just prior to the landing? As a drill, if nothing else?" "Oh, all right, I suppose a drill wouldn't be too out of order," she said with a careless shrug. "It would keep the ship's company on their toes." "Aye, aye, ma'am." "And load live ammo for the Mark 75? pressed Hacker. "Just who the hell do you think we're going to be shelling on the beach, Lieutenant?" snapped Sandoval. "Little old men walking their dogs and kiddies looking for seashells? Or do you think the Northwest Volunteer Navy is going to come around the point and attack us with Exocet missiles?" "I think, ma'am, that if they have Exocet missiles or anything like that, yes, they are quite capable of it," replied Hacker calmly, wondering if his career was now circling the bowl. Sandoval was about to respond, but then the radio crackled. "General Rollins on the horn for you from Ventura, ma'am," said a commo rating, holding up the phone receiver. The captain gave Hacker a poisonous look, but turned away. "No live ammo for the gun," she ordered over her shoulder. Lieutenant J.G. Charles Day leaned over and whispered, "Live ammo for the gun, sir?" "You bet your goddamned ass," hissed Hacker. At that moment, Zack Hatfield was crouched in a small trench, or elongated foxhole dug into the ground. The hole was on the left edge of the cut in the sand dunes that gave vehicular access to Sunset Beach from the highway, and it had been camouflaged from observation with a pile of heaped-up sand into which hundreds of carefully clipped sea oats had been inserted. Standing up. It wasn't the best camouflage in the world, and the ocean wind had already blown some of the sea oats down, but it provided a view of Sunset Beach, and it would do for the brief use Zack intended for it. He had in his hand a small silver wireless phone. Charlie Washburn slid in beside him. A shadowy line of men hoisting picks and shovels over their backs filed past on Zack's right, coming up from the beach. "Okay, Zack. Len's got the whole enchilada armed and ready. Your basic daisy chain of Baghdad bangers, 6 IEDs 20 yards apart and 3 feet deep, about 100 yards out. At high tide, they should be under the surf. You hit speed dial on that phone, the main charge detonates. That's the Semtex. The rest of the mines with the dynamite and C4 are wired, so in theory, you should get one hell of a bang and do some damage. Unless, of course, they decide to land a mile up the beach or a mile down, in which case we just buried most of our battalion's explosive ordnance in the ground for no reason, and we might not be able to get it back." "I know it's just a guess that this will be the spot, Charlie," said Hatfield, "but it's an educated guess. We know they're bringing vehicles, and the vehicles can't all be dune buggies. There will be some heavy trucks and APCs, maybe strikers, heavy enough to risk getting stuck. They'll probably lay down steel grating to offload the larger vehicles, but they'll still need to get onto a paved road as soon as possible and not go floundering around up and down the beach, and Sunset Avenue is the only access down onto the beach from the asphalt. I assume they either have someone with local knowledge, or more likely they can simply do an internet map search. If our information is correct and they're headed for Sunset Beach, then they've pretty much got to land right here. Maybe they've got wind that we're onto them and they've changed the landing site," suggested Charlie. "It's not dawn yet. Give 'em time. Besides, why haven't we seen a single copter floating around upstairs in the past 2 days? My guess is they still think they have the element of surprise. If they knew they'd lost it, we'd have whirlybirds flying around like a swarm of bees trying to find us, including gunships, and probably some kind of air insertion in here to secure the landing zone. But we've seen zip. No, those assholes have no idea we know they're coming." Zack made it a point to sound a lot more confident than he felt. "I'm more worried about air and satellite reconnaissance. I remember the U.S. Army, Charlie. They don't even go to the latrine without air cover and recon, period, end of story, since air superiority is what always makes the difference and wins wars for America. The ones they still win anyway." 19-year-old Lieutenant Ricky Parmenter of C Company, 3rd Battalion, appeared out of the dim gloom and squatted down by the trench. He was a slim and intense young man, blond and baby-faced, wearing jeans and a black cowboy hat and carrying an M16. Cap, Ragnar just got a call from the spotter he left up on the roof of that hotel at Seaside, the guy with the infrared night vision binoculars. And? Asked Hatfield. They're coming. Pretty certain to be them, anyway. He saw the lights of 4 large vessels sailing together, and looks like some smaller ones as well. They're making about 12 or 13 knots, so they'll be here in about 40 minutes, give or take. Coming in just at dawn, said Washburn. Damn, I almost forgot to tell you. Washington 3-Sec contacted Brigade Intelligence, and they just passed it along. A lot of copters left Fort Lewis about 15 minutes ago, heading south. They're coming here to rendezvous with the naval force. I wondered when they were going to show up. Come on. Hatfield and Washburn climbed up out of the trench, and the 3 of them walked back up the dirt road to an open Humvee parked on the side of the road, in the back of which was mounted a belt-fed Browning M2 machine gun. This was Zack's personal command vehicle, which the volunteers called the War Wagon. Standing beside the War Wagon was a tall and powerfully built auburn-haired man in denim with a beard and a braided ponytail, his chest crossed with 2 bandoliers of pouches containing loaded fan rifle magazines. This was the Swedish fighter known as Ragnar Redbeard, real name Captain Dan Dalen of the Nordland Flying Column, whose normal sector was the Oregon coastline from Tillamook on down to North Bend. Behind Dalen stood an even taller and more ferociously bearded man, who in addition to his bandolier of ammunition and grenades carried a large double-edged logger's axe across his back in a sheath. This was Big Nick, another Swede. Nick didn't say much. He tended to let his axe do the talking. Okay, Dan, thanks for the assist, said Hatfield. I especially appreciate the loan of your explosives. We'll greet our uninvited guests with a hell of a bang. You still gonna stick around? We come to fight, we fight, said Dalen. Well, pick a couple of your guys and get the rest on their way, said Hatfield. Charlie, our chosen men get here yet? Up the road, said Washburn. Okay, I need to brief them. They all walked up to the dirt road to where the pavement began, to a small parking lot on the right side of the notch. This was the entrance to a tiny mini park on the north side of the road, the starting point of a hiking trail along the sand dunes, a long winding pathway green with scrub-like conifers and ferns. It was still pretty dark, but Zack was astounded to see that the small lot was filled with cars and trucks and SUVs. Along the roadside, scores of armed men were standing or sitting in the sand. The rising gray light of dawn revealed a motley combination of dress and headgear and weapons. The men and a few women were wearing jeans, work clothes, surplus camouflage fatigues from half a dozen armies, even jogging sweats, along with headgear ranging from slouch hats to baseball caps to military fatigue caps. Around their waists were heavy web belts, and in some cases they bore packs on their backs. They were carrying every kind of long arm from M16 seconds to Kalashnikovs to hunting rifles, as well as at least 1 pistol on each belt, and a few were armed with heavy snipers' rifles and belt-fed light machine guns of both Russian and American manufacture, long ammo belts draped over their shoulders or rolled into assault bags. A small handful carried the 3rd Battalion's carefully hoarded collection of RPGs. Jesus Christ, Zack yelped. Charlie, what the fuck is this? I told you to ask for 3 volunteers from each company to cover my E&E after I pop the top, and for a couple of good 50 caliber men to take out any targets of opportunity that might offer. I didn't say bring everybody and his dog, just enough to make a gesture, no more than 20 men. Who the hell are all these people? You asked for volunteers, said Washburn. Everybody volunteered. Oh, for crying out loud, shouted Hatfield. We can't fight a pitched battle against 1,000 federal paramilitaries with naval and air support. This is insane. What, do you think we're going to charge them on the beach like a bunch of crazy Hajis screaming for Allah? I was in Iraq, goddammit all, and I've seen what happens when anybody tries that shit. We're guerrillas, remember? If we go head-on against the Americans, we'll be wiped out and lose everything we've spent years building here. We're trying to free our people and create a new country, not go to paradise with 70 virgins, and not play Rambo. I tried to tell them that, but I'm afraid we've been doing our work too well. explained Washburn. The volunteers here in Clatsop have gotten a taste of what freedom is like in these past couple of years, Zack. A taste for naught. Seeing faces the color of shit everywhere they look and hearing the gabble of foreign languages that don't belong here. And they like it. These bastards coming here to try and send us back to what was before have got them really, really pissed off. If I'd told some of these guys they couldn't come, I would have had a riot on my hands. "This is our land now, Zack," said Leonard Ekstrom, who had come up and joined the conversation. "We're not giving it back to them. We want to let them know that. We don't just need to make a gesture. We need to send that message to that bitch in D.C., loud and clear." Young Parmenter spoke up. "With all due respect, sir, none of us going to be known as the guys who hid back and left Zack Hatfield to face 1,000 fatties all alone. Don't worry, we're not fools. One good long mad minute and then we hook up and book. That's fine. That makes sense. But this is an important day and we all want a shot. All of us. We come to fight. We fight, not run away," repeated Dalen. Hatfield was angered and upset, certain he was looking at a major catastrophe in the making, but he understood intuitively that the Northwest Volunteers, for all the fact that they called themselves an army, were not an army in the true sense, and that straightforward military discipline was sometimes impossible. These men and women fought from their hearts, and sometimes their hearts had to be given precedence over tactical advantage, and maybe even common sense. "How many?" he asked Washburn. "By my count, including Comrade Ragnar's boys from down Newport Way, 185 men, or 160 men and 25 women to be exact, the same number Colonel Travis had at the Alamo, if you're into historical trivia." "That's a cheerful thought," muttered Zack. He thought for a few moments. "All right, but we have an immediate problem. We've had word their air cover is on the way down from Fort Lewis, and I don't see any way we can disguise or conceal all these vehicles from the air. One sweep over this area and they're going to know there's a lot of bodies on the ground. Charlie, Len, we've got less than an hour, maybe a lot less. I want you to get one driver from each vehicle, the one they came in, and try and disperse them as best you can. Park them up and down the roadside. Move them up into Sunset itself and park them on the street. Pull them off the road and cover them with brush, anything you can think of. If you can't conceal the transport, at least disperse them, so it will be harder for the gunships to destroy them from the air. Ricky, get together with Chaz and Gil and Sherry. You company commanders are going to have to sort out the arrangements for a quick Eonda. One driver per team who knows where the vehicle is parked, and he or she stays with that team and guides them back to the vehicle when we disperse, which we'll have to do fast, because we're going to have helicopter gunships chasing us. God damn, this is going to be a mess. Anyone loses their vehicle or gets separated from their crew, you're going to have to unass the area as best you can. "I wish I could have brought boat," said Dalen with a sigh. When he had heard about the impending naval assault, Dalen had desperately tried to convert his famous longship into a torpedo boat by working up some brass torpedoes, patterned after the old 1907 German pattern that had sunk the Lusitania, but there simply hadn't been enough time to get the technology working. "We must make this boat," he said, slamming his fist into his palm. "We need Northwest Volunteer Navy. After this, I'm sure you'll be able to get the okay from the Army Council," said Hatfield. "Len, you and Ricky supervise the dispersal of the vehicles under the best concealment you can. Then get everybody back here in the parking lot in 20 minutes and I'll tell them where I want them. One quick thing I need to know." Hatfield stepped forward and called out to the volunteers along the roadway. "How many of you comrades did service in Iraq or anywhere else in the Middle East? Raise your hands." At least 50 hands went up. "Then you'll know how to dig into sand. You guys who raised your hands, you stay here. For the rest of you, I need one person per team to report back to the vehicle you came here in. You will be dispersing them so they're not sitting all in a row as targets like it was an airfield at Pearl Harbor. Remember where your vehicle is parked, and make sure you can find your way back, which you will almost certainly have to do under fire. You all wanted a shot, fine, you'll get it, but so will Fatty. Charlie and Captain Dalen, come with me. I need to recon that beach and see where we can set up firing positions." Zack looked up at the bright red light of Mars, just now setting below the dark Pacific, but still visible even in the growing light. In his mind, he spoke to something he vaguely thought of as God. "I have only one thing to ask of you," he thought. "Send them here to us. Don't let them land somewhere else and catch us from behind or from above. If these noble men and women must die, let them die as Aryans, facing their enemy. We, called out Sue Loomis as she was lowered over the side on a steel cable wound from a boom winch down into the motor launch bobbing against the Ventura's portside hull. The launch did indeed resemble a large rubber life raft, but she had an outboard motor and proper folding seats, the latest in collapsible maritime technology, and in her packed state was not too much larger than the 270 horsepower outboard engine. The pontoons were bright orange, and since Fox News had paid for the little vessel and the men to operate her, she flew a Fox News pennant from her rounded bow. The launch had even been given a cutesy unofficial name, the Slither-a-Dee. It was 5:15 a.m. now. The sun wasn't actually up yet, but since it was only a few days past the longest day of the year, it was well light enough to see that it was going to be a clear day, not necessarily a given on the north coast of Oregon, where even the cool summer was often cloudy and overcast. Looks like Rolly has lucked out on the weather, and he'll get his grand entrance into the great white homeland by the light of the rising sun, remarked Hastings to Sue as he dropped down into the Slither-a-Dee and detached the harness from his life jacket. "That all of you?" called the sailor on the outboard. "Aye, aye, skipper," replied Hastings. The rubber boat contained almost 20 people, journalists and camera crews, and there was still plenty of legroom. The crewman fired up the outboard motor and the second sailor on the bow cast off the line. Hastings began to sing the theme song from Gilligan's Island, and all the others joined in. Just sit right back, and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The NVA men on the beach had a good view of the line of vessels that now lay about a mile off Sunset Beach. The transports hove to and resting at anchor in a column with the Higby bringing up the rear and about 500 yards inshore to their starboard. From the beach, Zack Hatfield, Charlie Washburn, and Len Ekstrom crouched in the camouflaged excavation they had made, watching the invaders through binoculars, screened by the waving sea oats that had been reinserted and packed in the sand piled in front of the trench. Rather than rely on cell phones, Len had come up with enough field radio sets so that Zack could speak to his 4 company commanders, and also to the 5 marksmen armed with the BMG rifles, who were designated by the code name Big Boppers. The volunteers were dispersed behind the dunes along the beach over 400-yard front by company, with a company under Lieutenant Ricky Parmenter on the right dug in around a wooden observation deck that jutted out of the small scrubby growth of wooded area that was Sunset Beach Park, and D Company under Lieutenant Sherry Tomzak on the far left. The men and everyone else with the right weapon, and good enough to be classified as a sniper, were hunkered down in hollowed-out firing posts along the crest of the dunes, the rest of the force lying prone on the eastern slope, sheltered from observation from the ships, but easily visible to any helicopter that should fly over. Captain Ragnar Redbeard and Big Nick were just out of sight around the bend of the access road, with the war wagon. Dalen had been so bitterly disappointed in his failure to rig up a torpedo boat in time that Hatfield had promised him a run on the beach to try out the war wagon's Ma Deuce when some targets became available. Dalen and Big Nick had inserted a pole with a large blue and yellow Swedish flag into a socket on the rear of the Humvee. Volunteer Holland Winnicki low-crawled up to the command post, cradling his M16 in his arms. He was wearing U.S. Army surplus desert camo fatigues, a bush hat, and a blue, white, and green armband around his left arm. "Looks like you're one of the few of us properly attired for this terrain," commented Zack. "I figured I'd better put this on so none of our comrades make any mistake when it hits the fan," said Winnicki, pointing to the tricolor armband. "You wanted to see me, sir?" "Yep," said Zack. "You're a former Navy man, right?" "Yes, sir." 10 years on shipboard, carriers and frigates, and 3 with the DNF in Iraq," said Winnicki. "Tell me what you make of that warship," asked Zack, "especially anything you know about the weapons systems on board." He handed Winnicki the binoculars. The ex-sailor took them and put them to his eyes, giving the enemy vessel a long look from head to stern. "That's the Higby, sir," he said. "Hamilton-class Coast Guard cutter, which is the largest type. Hamilton-class vessels are pretty potent. That's a Mark 75 76mm auto-loading repeating cannon in that globe turret on the bow. It has a computerized fire control system that can be operated from the bridge. Can't remember the max rate of fire, but it can lob a shell every second easy, and those heat rounds can punch a hole in pretty much anything that floats. On the stern there in the revolving column turret is a Mark I FATPO 20mm close-in weapons system. It can fire 3,500 rounds per minute. It's for use against attacking aircraft, and it's also got a computerized fire control system that syncs with the ship's radar. It can be used for ground support as well, of course. It can chew up this beach into talcum powder, I know that much. I've seen them used on shore targets in Iran and Gaza. They're no fun if you're on the receiving end. You've also got two 25mm chain guns, electric Gatling guns, on the port and starboard side. Can these dunes stop those rounds? Asked Hatfield. Dirt will stop almost anything, sir, but this is loose sand, which is fine for small arms cover. But that heavy stuff on Higby can literally blow the cover away. The 20 mils and 25 mils. Yes, for a short time, until the dunes are literally cut down to size, leveled. Those 76mm artillery shells will blow holes in them and maybe bury some of our guys, plus the concussion. Crap, said Hatfield. I'd ask about vulnerable spots, but we don't have anything to fire at it. We couldn't hit it at that range with an RPG, and even if we could, it would be like throwing ping-pong balls at the damned thing. Okay, volunteer. Back to your post. Winnicky crawled away, and once he was out of line of sight from the American ships, he stood up and ran back down the line to rejoin his team on the dunes. Lucky this is only going to be a shoot and scoot, if a big one, said Charlie. How many of us will that ship kill before we can E&E, muttered Hatfield glumly. And where the hell are those choppers? Are they going to take us from behind? Let's wait for them to come in, pick off their point men, and then book, said Leonard. Only you know, Zack. Looking at them now, I'm wondering how the hell they're planning on landing. Those two look like cruise ships almost. They won't be able to get too much closer in for fear of running aground, and that other looks like a ferry pulled by tugboats of all things. How are they planning on getting their men on shore? It would have to be in boats or landing craft of some kind. Maybe they're going to climb down cargo nets on the sides like the Marines in the South Pacific, but it would have to be into some kind of boat. Meaning they'll be coming ashore in small and more manageable numbers, said Zack thoughtfully. We can outgun them on the ground, at least at first, until that warship opens up, hit them from several directions at once with the old shock and awe trick. Although with their battleship and their copters that won't do us much good. Okay, how's this for a plan? We take out the first boat that hits our land, just enough to get some of their blood on the sand and send our message. Then we skedaddle, hopefully before that big boy can do us too much damage. We break up into teams and head for our E&E points. I don't see anyone on shore, said Sue from Reuters as the launch with the media people headed through the breakers. What did you expect, a welcoming party? Asked Seth Goldstein. The first golden rays of the sun were starting to glow on the eastern horizon. I was hoping to see Dawson Zucchino with his thermos, but it looks empty, said Sue. I didn't know there were any stretches of open beach like this left anywhere in the country. This coast has never been really all that favored by retirees, said Mark Hastings. The water is simply too cold, as we're about to find out when we get out, and the wind is too chilly even in July. What the hell is that? Said Zack, scanning the launch with his binoculars. A rubber boat or dinghy with an outboard motor. Big one, maybe 20 people on board. I don't see a single fatty or soldier in the bunch. I don't even think those are regular swabbies piloting and steering that boat. Whoever they are, they're coming right for us, said Charlie. I don't want to waste 6 IEDs and half a ton of explosives on a rubber boat, said Zack. But if they come up here, they're going to walk right past us and we'll have to be satisfied with wasting them, whoever they are, then bugging out. Without blowing the mines? Asked Len. After we spent all night planting the damn things? Let's just see what they're up to, said Zack. He spoke into his radio. This is Mountain Man. Whoever those people are in that rubber ducky, they're not hostiles, not armed ones. The Brigade. Anyway, hold your fire, maintain your positions, and maintain concealment. Repeat, do not fire unless I order it. High tide in 30 minutes, said Charlie Washburn. Why the hell are these people landing at high tide? On the upside, they'll be in closer range of our long arms than if it were low, pointed out Len. Vehicles, said Hatfield. They're going to be landing heavy vehicles, and if they rolled ashore in the wet sand at low tide, they'd be more likely to get stuck. I'll bet you that's why they towed that ferry up here like it was a garbage scow. It's full of all their motor transport. Damn, if there was only some way we could take that ship out. The radio crackled briefly. Mountain Man, this is Cowboy, came Parmenter's voice. Helicopters sighted southbound, maybe 2 miles out to sea, 3,000 or 4,000 feet up. Hard to tell yet, sir, but over a dozen, I'd say. Roger, Cowboy, said Hatfield. Keep me posted. Mountain Man out. They're not coming in over land? Why not, for God's sake? He wondered aloud. Maybe they're taking the scenic route, suggested Washburn. That doesn't make sense, said Hatfield, shaking his head. You have got to be kidding me, snapped Leonard Ekstrom, the binoculars to his face. What, Len? They're on the beach and they're unloading stuff from the boat. Television cameras, spluttered Len indignantly. Those are goddamn reporters. Makes sense, said Washburn. They want to film the landing of Zog's finest in living color, in time for Mr. and Mrs. America to watch it all at their breakfast table before they head off to their wonderful careers shoveling the Jews' shit. They did that in Somalia, in '92, sent the media in before the troops, so they could film the Marines storming ashore on an empty beach, and it never occurred to them at all that we might be waiting for them? Whispered Hatfield, a slow rage beginning to bubble and boil deep inside him. They just assumed that they could stroll right in here, and we would just let them, that we would never raise a hand to defend ourselves or our land and our homes? They think this is Iraq in 2003, said Len. Why should they? Asked Washburn flatly. Until 3 years ago, white men never resisted before. I still don't think they can wrap their minds around it. Dear God, what breathtaking arrogance, what contempt they must feel for us. In a black, cold, deadly rage, he picked up his radio. This is Mountain Man to all straw bosses and big boppers. I assume you all see what we're seeing. Everybody stay down and under cover. We don't want them to see us. If any of them get curious and wander up toward your positions, try to take them down silently. When the shit hits the fan, kill those media lice. All of them. He got a brief chorus of Roger that, they're setting up their gear, said Ekstrom. There was a brief whir out on the beach as one of Leonard Posner's crew started up the portable generator. Their unfolding stands for lights, it looks like, setting up cameras on tripods. And look where they're setting up, Zack. 70 yards right in front of us. That must mean that one of the boats will be landing right on top of our daisy chain. You were right. Looks like we'll get to pop the top and you can see the result of your long night's work after all, Len. I wonder if they've got a live feed, Zack asked himself out loud. Maybe we can give Mr. and Mrs. America a show that will make them choke on their breakfast egos. Why do they need those lights? Asked Washburn curiously. Sun's going to be up in a couple of minutes. The reporters needed the lights to do their preliminary lead-ins. Posner was up first, of course. Fox was always the ranking news network in any journalistic pecking order since it was the official government news medium. Even his most lukewarm fans, meaning all the other newshounds and hens, had to admire the way Posner slid right into character. He was wearing a canvas windbreaker and canvas trousers, LL, bean boots and a plaid shirt open just enough to show his hairy chest, and although his makeup girl had just finished with him, you'd never know he had a speck of powder or rouge on his face. The sea wind tousled his hair. He looked rugged and relaxed, and his voice was deep and authoritative. I am standing here on a deserted beach somewhere on the Oregon coast, where in a few minutes General Roland Rollins, officer commanding of the Federal Anti-Terrorist Police Organization, will be landing with a large force of highly trained and motivated men and women who are determined to take a big bite out of racist terror today. In a stunning and daring move, General Rollins has taken to the high seas in a brilliant flanking movement in order to insert some major American muscle, right into the heart of NVA bandit country, a part of the United States that has seen little law and less order for the past several years. It's a part of our country where people of color, Latino people, gay people, and anyone whose heart isn't filled with hate have been afraid to set foot for a long time. This is the stomping ground of the self-styled Captain Zack Hatfield and his wild bunch. Well, we're going to see just how wild Captain Hatfield and his bunch are. We'll be bringing you the landing live as soon as General Rollins steps ashore. Back to you in the studio, Tom. "Mountain Man, this is Cowboy," came Parmenter's voice on the radio. "You should be able to see the choppers now. They're coming in." "Great," sighed Hatfield. "Maybe they're going to secure the landing zone after all, but they're just late." "I see them," said Ekstrom, looking through the field glasses. "Yes, they're heading toward the shore. Straw bosses and big boppers. This is Mountain Man," said Hatfield into the radio. "When those choppers come in over the beach, if any of them is low enough and you know you can get a hit, take the shot. Ragnar, that little toy you guys have in my ride might come in useful there. Whiz-bangers, if there are any boats in the water and you're sure you can hit them, give them a rocket in their pocket. Once the choppers see us, we're going to have to beat feet. On my command word freedom, you open up on those media down there, terminate them and anything else you can hit, and then proceed to E&E. Confirm, copy, Mountain Man, roger that, Mountain Man," came the confirmations. "The choppers are circling," said Washburn. "What?" said Hatfield. He snapped the binoculars up to his eyes. "They're in what looks like some kind of holding pattern a mile out just beyond the ships," said Ekstrom. "Just circling. What in God's name are they doing?" asked Coast Guard Lieutenant Donald Hacker on the bridge of the Higby, staring at 14 black helicopters, Blackhawks and Apaches in transports, that were flying in circles off to the port side like children's toys, round and round. Captain Sandoval turned to him. "I told you before, number 1, General Rollins wants them to do a flyover just as he steps ashore through the surf," she said. "They're waiting for the Ventura to beach, which should be, there she goes." The ferryboat was underway, turning hard to starboard. "I still can't quite wrap my mind around this business of deliberately running a large vessel aground for a photo op, Captain," said Hacker. "Especially at high tide, where she'll be stranded for half the day. Ventura is not some World War II LST. What if the tugs can't pull her off the beach after she's unloaded?" "Then we just leave her there," said Sandoval. "The hulk will become a national monument one day. I guess you're just not media savvy, number 1. "I guess not, ma'am," agreed Hacker. "That ferry is coming into shore," Ekstrom told Hatfield in the dugout. "How are they going to get their vehicles off?" asked Charlie. "I guess they're just going to run the whole damned ship right up on the beach and lower the ramp," said Hatfield. "At high tide?" asked Ekstrom. "Stranding the ship?" "Hey, when you've got all the money in the world, you can afford to break some of your toys," said Hatfield. "But why are those choppers just loafing around out there? What the hell are these assholes up to? This doesn't make any sense. They can't really be this careless." "Have you considered the obvious?" asked Washburn. "Have you considered that they may just be bird-brained, stupid, and incompetent, and they haven't got a clue what the fuck they're doing? This government and the Pentagon have been fighting a bunch of barefoot brown ragheads in the Middle East for almost a generation now, and they still haven't figured out how to beat them. We're ruled by idiots. What happens in a system when you promote people into important jobs and positions based on the color of their skin or the fact that they've got tits on them, instead of on their ability to do the job?" asked Ekstrom rhetorically. "You get disaster after disaster, like in the Middle East. Like here. Zack, we may have more of a chance to do some damage here than you think. Apparently that vehicle ferry is coming in first, and coming in alone. My God, the whole thing is a soundbite. It's nothing but one big photo op to these people," gasped Zack in sudden comprehension. "I'll bet you dollars to donuts that they're going to lower the ferry ramp, and the first person to step off will be that nigger Congressman Roland Rollins, grinning like an egg-sucked dog, and behind him will come all kinds of marching men and strikers and Hummers. And right about then those damned copters will come flying overhead. I'd heard that Chimp was planning on challenging Chelsea Clinton for the presidency, and this is going to be his first campaign appearance, stepping onto our land like he was some kind of monkoid Jesus. I believe Custer was planning on running for president as well," commented Washburn. "We're a funny-looking bunch of Indians, though." Hatfield picked up his radio. "Big boppers. When that thing hits the shore, a ramp is going to drop, and almost certainly, the monkoid Roland Rollins is going to exit the vessel. Keep your sights on him, and all 5 of you open up on my command. He got 5 copies." The men sounded excited. Washburn chuckled. "What's so funny?" asked Hatfield. "I'm thinking about seeing Cat Lockhart's face when I run all this by him, and him not being here," Washburn replied. While the media party waited idly for the fast-approaching Ventura, Seth Goldstein was growing increasingly uncomfortable. "Hey man, I gotta drain the snake," he said to Hastings. "If I take a whiz in the surf here, will you promise not to film it?" "No promises," laughed Hastings. "We are already working on our outtakes and bloopers reel for this shoot. Go up behind the dunes." "It's too far to walk," complained Goldstein. "So go down the beach and whip it out," Hastings told him. "I think we all know you're circumcised, Seth. I won't tell the camera crew. Honest Injun." Goldstein looked at him and said, "Bullshit, you won't," and he started shuffling toward the access road entrance. On the bridge of the Higby, Lieutenant J.G. Day told Executive Officer Lieutenant Hacker, "One of the shore party is leaving the group, sir." Hacker picked up the radio hand mic. "Slithery, this is Mama Bear. Who's that walking away from you and where's he going?" The sailor with the radio came back after a moment. "That's the MTV guy, Mama Bear. He had to take a leak. Didn't want to do it on the beach since we have female personnel here." "Okay, well, make sure you keep an eye on him," ordered Hacker. "Keep an eye on him yourself, asshole. I ain't in the Navy no more," muttered the sailor, sticking the radio back into its holster and resuming his attempt to flirt with Leonard Posner's makeup girl. "One of them is coming this way," said Ekstrom. "Damn," cursed Hatfield. "Hunker down, guys. Maybe he won't see us." Goldstein trudged up the apparently empty beach toward the roadway, looking for a nice concealed spot to urinate where his merry colleagues wouldn't film him and preserve it for the ages. He saw a low rise of sand and sea oats at the base of the right-hand berm that looked promising. He reached the mound, unzipped his trousers and unlimbered his circumcised schwanza, and stepped around the mound of sea oats preparatory to emptying his bladder. He looked down and saw 3 men in a shallow dugout pointing rifles at him, 2 Kalashnikovs and a Winchester. Goldstein's thick-lipped jaw dropped and he turned to run, but Zack Hatfield reached up, grabbed the protuberance at his waist and pulled him into the hole. "What was that?" said Lieutenant Day suddenly, taking the binoculars down. "What?" asked Hacker. "I thought I saw something just now," said Day, "and that guy who went off by himself to take a piss is gone." "We have no jurisdiction over civilian personnel, Lieutenant," snapped Captain Sandoval irritably. "They can relieve themselves where they want." "Yes, ma'am," replied Day. One of the men slapped his hand over Seth's mouth, and the third grabbed and pinioned his arms. Goldstein tried to shriek in pain and terror. He recognized Hatfield, who leaned over him, studying Goldstein's camel face, his acned skin and fleshy nose and frizzy hair. "A Jew," Hatfield said, soft and low, his voice filled with loathing. "A goddamned Jew." Goldstein screamed under the iron hand clamped over his mouth and writhed in terror, knowing that the ancient enemy of his race was upon him, and seeing doom in blue eyes, as so many of his kind had done before, down through the ages. Hatfield leaned over and cupped Goldstein's round head in his hands, and whispered the single word Dresden in his ear before snapping his neck like a pretzel. Seth Goldstein kicked and flopped and shit and died. "We don't dare kick him out," said Hatfield. "He might be seen." "Great, now we have to stand on a dead Jew with shit in his pants," groused Charlie. There was a grinding noise from the beach as the U.S.S. Ventura ground ashore, piling up mounds of dripping sand like gigantic sandcastles on either side of the bow. Zack studied the scene through his binoculars. "Oh God, they fucked up again," he hissed in amazement. "What do you mean?" asked Ekstrom. "The ship. Look at where it's come ashore," said Hatfield, pointing through the sea oats. "I don't believe it. I just don't believe it." "Right on top of our Semtex IED, our main charge," said Ekstrom. "If the charge hasn't been too shaken up and it detonates, we can do enough damage to wreck the loading ramp, and they won't be able to get their vehicles off. Maybe we can even disable the whole ship." "That's not all," pointed out Charlie. "Check out the relative positions of the transport and the warship. Everybody to our right down to a company in the park will have that big hunk of ferry boat between them and the cutter's guns." Zack snatched up his radio. "Queen of Hearts and Pigpen, this is Mountain Man. Listen up. You need to change positions. Get your people down on the ground on the east side of the berm, and then move north, cross the road and take up positions reinforcing Alpha and Bravo companies. This does not apply to big boppers and other marksmen. You guys have to stay in place where you are, because we have to cover the kill zone from every angle, so stay low in your blinds and try not to get spotted. Cowboy and guitar man, get somebody down to the roadway and guide Charlie and Delta companies into your locations. We need to try and keep that ship that just grounded itself between us and the battle wagon to act as a shield. You got all that, comrades?" "Got it," said Sherry Tomzak. "Delta on our way. Queen of Hearts out." "Roger, Mountain Man," said Parmenter. "We're running out of time," said Hatfield. "That monkoid is going to be strutting his stuff off that ship any minute now, and once it's showtime we need to be shooting, not running around in the backfield. Move!" The media people on the beach had backed up a bit and were repositioning their cameras. Posner was talking on his phone with someone inside the vessel. Sue Loomis looked around in awe and pleasure as the golden rays of the rising sun suddenly lit up the beach in soft, warm amber light. "Well, I have to admit this will be an impressive bite," she said. "I might even vote for Rollins myself." "What's the holdup?" asked Bob Baker. "Waiting on Fox and CNN live satellite feeds, and once we get those we have to give the copters about 4 minutes notice," explained Hastings. "Ah, okay, there was go. We have live feed. Cue the choppers, Leonard." There was a grinding noise of metal on metal as the loading ramp of the Ventura began to slowly lower itself toward the surf. "The ship's loading ramp is starting to come down," said Hatfield into his radio. "Let's move it, boys and girls." "Cue the choppers," said Leonard Posner. The 3-minute delay waiting on the helicopter's arrival gave the NVA just barely enough time to move off down the far side of the dunes, trot across the road, and then take up new firing positions on the north side of the road, being careful not to be seen. Not that any of the media party were even looking back toward the dunes. All cameras and eyes were on the slowly descending ramp. "Set," came the voices of the 3rd Battalion Company commanders. "Choppers coming inshore, Captain," said Washburn, looking through his binoculars. Zack spoke into the radio. "Okay, listen up, straw bosses, and pass this on to your troops. I'd lay bets and give odds that Bubble Lip Rollins will be first out. After you big 50 guys waste him, I'm going to pop the top on the daisy chain, after which we open up. But no mad minute. Mark your targets, aim, and make every shot count. Because this thing may well go on for longer than we anticipated, and I don't want us to run out of ammo. Big boppers, after you take down that nigger, engage the copters. Try to hit a rotor gear housing or some other vulnerable spot. A BMG round can bring down a whirlybird if you hit right. Plus, if they know they're being shot at by 50s, they'll bob and weave and get up high to get out of range. But for now, keep your scopes on that beach and lock in on Rollins the minute he shows his nappy head. Fire on my command." The roar and flap and whoopa-whoopa of the slowly approaching helicopters could be heard above the surf now. The ramp was down. Suddenly, a series of large stereophonic speakers mounted on the decks of the Ventura crashed into a thunderous opening with full brass, followed by the 1,000 voices of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on." "And cue General Rollins," shouted Leonard Posner. 2 columns of FATPO men in full body armor, wearing their almost black blue serge Kevlar and cloth, and armed with M16s and light machine guns and grenade launchers, tumbled out of the Ventura's hold. They formed 2 files, and between them stepped General Roland Rollins, a huge and powerfully built, very black man with a medium afro and blinding white teeth. Rollins was wearing his full FATPO uniform of blue serge, but he was also wearing across his chest and torso a bright red sash of some kind, and over his left pocket sparkled a riotous array of campaign ribbons, 6 rows of them, none of which Rollins had earned. He had selected them because he liked their colors. They included every Middle Eastern campaign medal, the Vietnam Service Medal, a Purple Heart with cluster, a British Distinguished Flying Cross from the Second World War, the Navy Submarine Service Ribbon, and a black ribbon with a black fist and a silver heart that he had designed and made himself. On his right chest were several full medals, including a Bronze Star, a Silver Star, the French Legion of Honor, and the Catholic Order of the Sacred Heart. His advisors had finally persuaded him not to wear a Congressional Medal of Honor around his neck. Instead, they gave him a large jewel-encrusted Maltese cross of blue and black, borrowed from a Hollywood movie set in 19th century Vienna, which meant nothing at all. Some costume designer had made it up. His chest was further covered with gold-braided cord and lanyards, again meaning nothing. He was wearing his FATPO uniform cap, dark wrap-around shades, and a corncob pipe was jutting from his mouth. Charlie Washburn stared at this apparition through his binoculars. "What on earth? Is that Idi Amin or Douglas MacArthur?" he asked, fascinated. Rollins strode forth energetically through the surf, which reached up to his knees as he stepped off the ramp. His FATPO escorts slogged soggily along with him on either side. The rousing chorus of the battle hymn of the Republic thundered overhead. "Ready!" snapped Hatfield into the radio. To the surprise of both Ekstrom and Washburn, Hatfield stepped up out of the dugout and walked several paces toward the beach, upright, totally visible. All cameras and almost 200 million pairs of eyes around the world were now turned on Roland Rollins as he came to the edge of the beach, took the pipe from his mouth and placed his hands on his hips, bemedaled and beribboned chest thrust forth. He had elected to fracture not one but two famous white men, MacArthur and Julius Caesar, and steal their words as closely as he could. Roland Rollins announced to the world, "I have come, I will see, and I shall conquer." Higher up on Sunset Beach, Zack Hatfield raised his radio to his lips and shouted into the handset the command to fire. "Freedom!" 200 million viewers around the globe saw the body of Roland Rollins torn to pieces as 5 slugs smashed into him and sent him twirling and whirling head over heels high into the air like a popped balloon, knocking him into the sea where he floated like a sack of gaudy, dirty laundry. Roland Rollins died at 5:45 a.m. exactly, or 0545 hours to use military time, just as the golden sunrise flooded the beach with glowing amber light. Among the 200 million viewers who saw him die were Captain Merrill Sandoval and Lieutenant Donald Hacker, who were monitoring the raw feed transmission on the bridge of the Higby. Both of them stared at the screen as Rollins whirled away into the air, flapping like a scarecrow in the wind. Simultaneously, they heard a popping and snapping rattle from the shore, almost like a big sheet of cardboard being shredded. On the TV monitor, they could see sparks flying on the steel of the ship's hull and high spatters of sand and water as bullets popped into the beach and the surf. Then the camera was knocked over, and all they saw was a stretch of beach and the frothing edge of the incoming tide, with the occasional spurting round strike zipping and splatting. About 1 minute later, a dead hand flopped in front of the camera. There was no way to tell who it belonged to. 0546 hours, shore party reports receiving ground fire, Captain, Lieutenant Hacker said with a snappy salute that only a dunce would not have recognized as sarcastic contempt. "Looks like there was something waiting for us on that beach besides sand dollars after all, ma'am. And you sailed right into it. Congratulations." Sandoval had sense enough to keep her cool, understanding that right now she needed to get out of this crisis before devoting the rest of her career to exculpating herself and nailing Hacker's hide to the hatchway door. She snatched up the radio handset and called for the bridge of the beleaguered ferry. "Ventura, this is Captain Sandoval," she said. "Captain Mulvaney, what is your situation?" "Our situation is there's a lot of people on the beach shooting at us," replied Mulvaney in a dry voice. "Mostly small arms so far, although someone just blew off the bow capstan with an RPG. Sandoval and Hacker could hear clangs and ricochets, and they could tell that the bridge was taking bullets. Not that we'll need any of our anchors, since for some strange reason, I seem to have deliberately run my own ship aground, against all common sense and thousands of years of basic seamanship. Now I wonder what black jackass ordered me to do that. And what Coast Guard she-jackass wouldn't back me up when I tried to explain to him what a stupid thing that was to do." "Recriminations later, Captain," snapped Sandoval, fighting the rising panic in her mind. "Surely she wouldn't be blamed for this? What do you want us to do to assist you, Ventura?" "What do I want you to do?" came Mulvaney's voice, heavy with disbelief. "What do I want you to—" Hacker could almost see the veins on Mulvaney's head and neck bursting with rage and disbelief, and he hoped his own were not quite so visible. "Well, Captain Sandoval," Mulvaney continued, obviously making a major effort to get a grip on himself, "let's think about this. Armed insurgents are shooting at my ship and the people on it, since thanks to your boneheaded orders we can't get underway and get the hell out of range, and seeing as how you have an armed combat vessel sitting there with all kinds of gun-and-type thingies that go bang on board, do you think it might be possible, ma'am, for you to, how can I put this, Maybe shoot at those motherfuckers on the beach? I believe it is customary to return fire in military situations, ma'am, said Hacker with a deadpan straight face. Oh, for God's sake, put Hacker on, roared Captain Mulvaney's voice from the radio. Hacker grabbed the hand mic away from the stunned Sandoval without asking her permission. He figured as the senior white male on board he was going to get court-martialed anyway, so he might as well try and save the situation while he was at it. Derek, this is Dawn, he said into the radio. Can you tell where it's coming from and give me any idea how many of them there are? No idea, Don, but there are a lot of the bastards, said Mulvaney. Well over 100 if there's a single one. Light weapons mostly, a lot of AKs by the sound of them, but also Mike 16s and at least a few LMGs of some kind, plus RPGs and God knows what else. Most of it seems to be coming from the dune line about 100 yards in, 45-degree angle or so off the port bow. Can't see any of them. They must be dug in pretty good. Some of the FATPO guys are returning fire from the deck with their own small arms, so we're keeping their heads down. But stuck on the goddamned beach like this, we're just sitting here taking it. Even if you could get the tugs in, by the time we got the cables back up and secured, under fire, they couldn't pull us off, because by then the tide will have turned and we'll be too high and dry. You need to get those guns of yours going and sweep this beach. Get Jerry Reb to back off, but you'll need to get clear of our stern so you can get a shot at them. 0547 hours, sound general quarters, screamed Merrill Sandoval into the ship's public address system. Ah, ma'am, the ship's company has been at general quarters for the past 20 minutes, Lieutenant J.G. Day reminded her. The drill, remember? Well, open fire then, shrieked Sandoval. Open fire on what, ma'am? Asked Lieutenant Day. They're using the Ventura itself as a shield, trying to keep her between us and them, said Hacker grimly. There don't seem to be any hostiles on the south side of the beach. We have to clear Ventura and then knock them back off the shoreline. Helmsman ahead slow. Fire control. Ship's gun stand by. Wait, you have to bring up the live shells from the magazine first, insisted Sandoval. The Mark 75 is already loaded with live shells, said Hacker. The resultant screaming match over Hacker's insubordination could probably have been heard on shore, had it not been for the gunfire and explosions. Day interrupted. Ma'am, Air Dog 1 is calling. Colonel Westerbrook wants to know if we need assistance. Yes, we damned well need assistance, snapped Hacker. Tell him to get his gunships in here and start pounding that damn beach. What do you think you're doing? Screeched Sandoval. I'm in command now that General Rollins is deflated, said Hacker brutally. Very well, ma'am, we've got air support standing by. What do you suggest they do? Tell them to hold their position, ordered Sandoval. What? Why, for God's sake, demanded Hacker, astounded. We don't know how many of the enemy there are, or where they are, yelled Sandoval. The bridge crew all stared at her. No, ma'am, we don't, said Hacker gently, wondering if the captain was on the brink of some kind of hissy fit. If you'll recall, that's why I suggested that we recon the landing zone from the air beforehand. That is why we need to get some choppers in the air over the beach, and look down and see how the hell many of them there are, and where they are. Oh, said the captain, suddenly acutely aware of the fact that she was screwing up and everyone knew it. You're right, of course, Lieutenant. Tell Colonel Westerbrook to send in his gunships to support the Ventura. 0548 hours. On the beach, most of the media party had gone down in the first hail of NVA bullets, as per Hatfield's orders, and were now either lying very still on the sand in sodden red puddles or crawling along blindly like squashed and bleeding beetles. Hastings and Bob Baker and several camera crew members were killed outright in the first fusillade. Sue Loomis was hit twice in the back and neck. She tried to crawl out of the line of fire for about 30 yards, and then passed out on her stomach with her face in a small tidal depression that was slowly filling up with seawater as the tide completed its advance. She eventually drowned before she could bleed to death. Leonard Posner, to give him fair due, died while trying to do his job. He jerked the camera back up into a standing position on its tripod, leveled it and made sure it was on, and then stepped in front of it with a microphone, his face ghastly. This is Leonard Posner on Sunset Beach in Oregon. Just now the world was shocked and horrified to witness the death of General Roland Rollins at the hand of the fascist beasts, who are now firing at the men and women of the FATPO and the U.S.S. Ventura from entrenched positions along the beach here. Somehow or other we have been lured into a bloody ambush. There are bullets flying all around me, but the brave men and women of FATPO are resisting and preparing to. The world would never know what Posner claimed the brave men and women of FATPO were about to do, because at that moment a BMG slug decapitated him, and his headless, blood-gushing corpse slid down out of the camera's view like a special effect from a zombie movie. 0549 hours. Inside the vehicle bay of the Ventura, FATPO Captain Melvin Rogers from Tulsa, Oklahoma crouched behind one of the armored strikers, looking out and trying to see what was going on outside on the beach. Rogers was a former Marine and Pentecostal lay preacher. He had felt called by God to take up the sword of righteousness and kill his fellow white people in the Northwest in Jesus' name, so they would stop hating their fellow man. Now, looking around him, he saw that the ship and the decreasing number of FATPO troopers in his command were in serious danger. 2 columns of vehicles had been queued up to roll down the ramp and onto the beach, like parade floats after Rollins's spectacular advent. The second vehicle in the left-hand column was an 18-wheeler, a full gasoline tanker, and it was exposed to small arms fire from the beach, a head-on shot or a ricochet, or even worse, an RPG. "We've got to get that tanker truck off the ship," he yelled to Sergeant Leon Ramos. It did not occur to him to try and raise the ramp to shield the truck from the hail of gunfire, and in any case, even if it had occurred to him, he didn't know how. "Yeah, man, I see dat," yelled back the Mexican. "If it goes up inside the deck here, we'll be cooked like fajitas, man. But who's gonna be fucking stupid enough to drive a gas tanker right into a bunch of flying bullets, S.A.?" Rogers didn't bother to inform Sergeant Ramos that man was not the correct form of address to an officer. He understood the situation was a bit informal. "I will," he said. "A tracer slug punches through that tank, and you gonna be one crispy critter, S.A., said Ramos disbelievingly. "That doesn't matter," said Rogers. "When the rapture comes, Jesus will take me up into the sky anyway. But someone has to go ahead of me, to get that Humvee out of the way so I can get the truck off the ship and away from here. Will you take the Humvee?" "Sure, what the fuck, Votto, might as well die out there in the fresh air as in here," said Ramos with a shrug. 0:54:9:30 hours. In the scraped-out command post, Hatfield was watching the fighting through binoculars, which consisted by this point of volunteers behind the cover of the dunes and some of the trees in the little hiking park, plinking away at anything they saw moving on the huge looming decks of the Ventura, as well as FATPO on the decks covering behind anything metal and spraying wild bursts of fire toward the sand dunes. He yelled into his radio, "Mark your targets, damn it, you guys. Straw bosses, tell your people don't waste ammo. Fire only when you've got something to fire at. You're just making a lot of dents in the hull. Can we toss out this damned dead Jew now? And when are you going to blow the daisy chain?" Charlie Washburn shouted in his ear. "Affirmative on the Kike toss, and I'll be popping the top to cover our disengage in E and E," Zack replied. "And when will that be?" asked Ekstrom. "When the copters arrive and open up on us, or else when that Coast Guard cutter quits fucking around and starts plastering us," said Zack. "What the hell are those swabbies doing out there, taking a vote?" A black-painted Humvee driven by Sergeant Ramos came roaring down the ramp and onto the beach, rolling over a number of prone boats of media and fallen FATPOs. "Shit, they're bringing out their vehicles. They're going to charge us," Hatfield yelled. On top of that, he heard the whoopa 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 of helicopters coming in fast and low. "Choppers incoming." Then there was an inarticulate shout from both Washburn and Ekstrom as an 18-wheeler drawing a long silver tank lurched rumbling and roaring out onto the ramp. "That's it, Zack. That's perfect," bellowed Washburn. "Do it. Blow it now." Zack whipped out the cell phone and flipped it open. He said a quick and silent prayer that the detonation device fitted together by Len Ekstrom in the dark would work, and that the charge hadn't been damaged or disconnected somehow by all the vibration. And he hit speed dial. 0550 hours. The earth and the sea shook beneath them all. 6 huge explosions in a row hurled a massive, eccentrically shaped sheet of sand and water 100 feet in the air. The Ventura's bow leaped into the air and the ship came crashing back down. An immense tear ripped into her belly that made her forever unseaworthy from that moment on. There would be no pulling her back out to sea now. Sunset Beach was her grave. The unsecured vehicles in her belly were tossed over one another like kitty toys in a sandbox, and in many cases their fuel tanks ruptured and gushed gasoline and diesel fuel. The gasoline tanker flowered into a bright orange blossom and then a column of fire that leaped into the sky, wreathing the Ventura's forward decks in flame. Captain Melvin Rogers got his rapture. He was called up into the sky to whatever paradise awaits the brave but stupid, and hopefully he was not too displeased by what he found there. The explosion sheared off part of a stainless steel railing from the Ventura's forward promenade deck and hurled it high and straight and fast into the air, ripping through the bottom of a FATPO Black Hawk helicopter that was flying over at just the wrong moment. The railing transfixed the body of Colonel Edward Westerbrook, the senior pilot commander of the entire FATPO Corps, and pinned him to the back of his seat, killing him instantly. It also severed the control cables in the cockpit. The Black Hawk flipped over and arched downward, crashing and bursting into flames, hurling metal and still twirling rotors up and down the beach. The other 3 gunships broke away in panic, also pelted with earth and debris from the IED explosions. One of the Apaches had a main rotor hit by shrapnel knocked off plumb, and it became hard to control. The pilot veered away to the north, radioing to the Higby that he would try for an emergency landing further down the beach out of the kill zone. 0:55:015 hours, a number of secondary explosions of ammunition and vehicle fuel tanks began to detonate on the main car deck of the Ventura as FATPO Humvees, trucks, and other items began to pop like a string of Chinese firecrackers. A number of burning FATPOs ran screaming out onto the beach, rolling in the surf to put themselves out. The NVA gunners in the dunes chopped them all down with bursts of rifle and machine gun fire. The Humvee driven by Ramos was still rolling around the beach like a scurrying beetle. An RPG round snaked out from the dunes in a sinuous vapor trail and smashed into its side. The Humvee was blown off its wheels, rolling over several times before coming to rest upside down in a tidal pool. 0:55:030 hours, Madre de Dios. "What's that?" screamed Merrill Sandoval on the bridge of the Higby. Hacker for once was at a loss for a snappy retort. "I don't know," he admitted. "But something big as hell just went up on board Ventura. Jesus Christ, they brought down a Black Hawk," shouted Day in amazement. "That's Westerbrook's bird. Captain Mulvaney, do you read?" Hacker spoke urgently into his radio. "Are you all right?" "What the hell happened, Derek?" "Damned if I know," came Mulvaney's reply, his voice shaky and dazed. "If I didn't know better, I'd say we were torpedoed or hit a mine. Whatever it was blew the ship's bow into the air and we landed on our side. We're listing to port. Almost 20 degrees, goddammit." "Damage?" demanded Hacker. "Sensors say we've got fire on the car deck and the crew reports say we have fire on the forward decks," said Mulvaney. "I'd order abandoned ship, but those maniacs on shore are still trying to kill us. Is that Beaner bitch planning on giving us any supporting fire at all? Or are you guys just going to eat popcorn and watch the show?" "We're coming astern of you now, Derek," said Hacker. "One more minute and we'll be able to sight in the 76mm and the starboard chain gun on the enemy positions and clear that beach of hostiles. Then you can evacuate." "I think I just did," said Mulvaney. "Don't worry, the boy will stand on the burning deck. Now fuck up those goots for me." "My pleasure. Out. Mr. Day, can you make out the enemy?" Just a few muzzle flashes in the dunes, sir," said Day, looking through his binoculars. "They're dug in real good. Looks like—" "You learn how in Iraq," said Hacker. He looked at Captain Sandoval. "You see, ma'am, these people we're today fighting aren't white trash gangsters and thugs like you said. They're Americans. A lot of them veterans of this goddamned war without end that jug years started back in 01. A few years ago I was fighting on the same side as some of these men. I may even have met some of them over there. They know what they're doing, and you're underestimating them out of politically correct arrogance has gotten a lot of people killed today." 0:551 hours fire control, said Sandoval. "Ma'am?" said the E5 at the console. "Open fire," she shouted. Open fire where and how, ma'am?" asked the rating, rolling his eyes. Hacker stepped forward. "Fire control officer, Mark 75 gun, at 800 yards starboard range, 1 second interval fire, lay down. A moving barrage along the bottom of the dune line. Starboard to port from 90 degrees to 75 degrees and back again. He clicked the intercom. "Starboard chain gun, sir," came the response from the sailor who was strapped in behind the multi-barreled machine gun. "On my command, see if you can shave about a foot off the top of those sand dunes, 90 degrees to 75 degrees, then back again, until I tell you to cease fire." "Aye, sir. Gunners." Sighted, sir," said the petty officer. "Fire!" shouted Hacker. The Higby's single automatic cannon barrel boomed, and flames spat from its muzzle, and the starboard Gatling gun began to spew heavy 25mm slugs onto the shore, tracer rounds leaping from the rolling multiple barrels. Shell bursts on the beach hurled mushrooms of sand into the air. 55-1-15 hours, Zack Hatfield shouted, "Okay, move out," into his radio. "Plan B, straw bosses like we talked about." The volunteers hastily abandoned their foxholes and impromptu firing blinds as the Coast Guard shells started slamming into the sand around them, pelting back away toward the road. On the bridge of the Higby, Hacker heard on the radio, "Mama Bear, this is Air Dog 6. I see them. They're on the move. Must be a couple of hundred of them, moving in and out among the trees and the dunes. They're abandoning their positions on the north side of the Ventura and they're moving south. I see RPGs and some belt-fed LMGs, and there seem to be some vehicles on a road leading up to the main highway that have people in back, with LMGs and at least one Ma-Deuce on a Humvee. Looks like that character Hatfield's famous ride he's supposed to roll around town in." "Air Dog 6, are the hostiles departing the area?" asked Hacker. "Negative, Mama Bear. They're crossing the road and looks like they're covering down in the dunes on the south side of Ventura so they can keep on blasting away at her. I'll rocket their asses." "Roger that. Air Dog 6. Why the hell aren't they running away?" Sandoval wondered out loud. 0552 hours. The Apache gunship roared over the far end of Sunset Beach, turned in a tight arc and came in on a strafing run. The CO pilot inclining the twin rocket launchers and the forward Gatling gun and sighting in to blast a trench through the middle of the dunes. "Air Dog 4. I'll do a run and then you do one from the north," radioed the pilot. "Roger, Air Dog 6, came the reply. Zack Hatfield got on his radio. "Bandits coming in from both sides," he shouted. "Present arms to the south, remember, lead them. On my command, wait for it." The Apache pilot was no fool and he came in fairly high, almost 500 feet, and fast. The Gatling gun began to spew death in a steady stream down into the sand dunes. "Now, rip him!" shouted Hatfield. Streams of automatic and semi-automatic fire rose in flickering plumes from the beach into the sky. One marksman could never have hit the flying machine coming at them at over 150 miles per hour. But 180 guns firing in unison wove a screen of bullets that the copter had to fly through, and Zack could see sparks from the round strikes on the fuselage and bottom of the Apache. One anonymous bullet struck the warhead of a rocket in the millisecond before the co-pilot fired the launcher and detonated it. The helicopter exploded in mid-air, and chunks of hot metal and human body parts were hurled, slamming down into the ground. 55-30 hours now the other one, said Hatfield into his radio. "Everybody present arms to the north." Air Dog 4 had seen what happened to Air Dog 6, turned and hovered for a bit, ready to take off northward at top speed, but from the ground below came a deadly chunka-chunka-chunka sound. A dozen armor-piercing rounds from the M2 Browning machine gun mounted on the back of Zack's war wagon, fired by Big Nick the Swede, punched through the skin of the Apache. One of them blew off the pilot's right leg, and a second exited though the roof, sheared the main gear housing beneath the rotors in half. The copter seemed to flutter briefly, and then it simply dropped like a stone onto the access road. 0553 hours, God in heaven, they brought down all 4 copters, gasped Merrill Sandoval in shock. "Some gangsters and thugs," growled Hacker. "Plus they've bugged out and put the Ventura between us and them again. All weapons systems cease fire. We're just plowing up empty beach now." He got onto the radio. "Air Dog Commander, whoever that is now, this is Mama Bear. The hostiles have taken down all 4 of the gunships. Do you have any more?" "Negatory, Mama Bear," came the reply. "We're all transports, and truth to tell, we're running low on fuel. We were expecting to refuel at the Astoria airport, but I guess that's no longer an option. We need to head for Portland. For crying out loud, you've got 10 choppers left out there, and you must have door gunners or some kind of armament, yelled Hacker. You're saying you can't give us any air support? What the fuck? You military guys stuck your hands into this hornet's nest, you can pull yourselves out, said the pilot carelessly. We ain't military, we're special federal officers. Later, dudes. It's been a real slice. The copters leveled out into formation and began flying northward well out to sea. Hacker was able to live up to sailors' reputation for salty language, but the copters were soon gone off the radar. All right, what do we do now? Asked Sandoval. She was seething with rage, but she still maintained a sufficient grasp on reality to understand that her executive officer was better at this than she was, and she needed him to get her out of the mess before she figured out how to blame him for it. Launch our own copter, reverse course, and try to get back in range? I think we need to save our copter for recon over a new landing site, ma'am. We don't know how long he'll have to stay in the air, and he's not armed. We could sail up and down this beach all day and they'd simply scuttle back and forth like a school of minnows, always keeping Ventura between our main guns and them. God damn, whose idiotic idea was it to run a huge vessel like that aground that provides anybody on the beach with a shield? Demanded Hacker. Never mind. We need to evacuate everybody off the Ventura. She's starting to burn pretty good, and when the fire hits the main diesel tanks and the turbine boiler, she may blow sky high. Never mind all the extra ordnance and fuel that hasn't detonated yet. We have to get them off the beach, and then we find another landing place, maybe down by that headland, and we put the men ashore under full cover from our weapon systems. Helmsman, stop engines, then reverse slow. I thought you said we weren't going to chase them up and down the beach, demanded Sandoval. We're not. We're just backing up a bit, said Hacker. We'll cover the north side and Mulvaney can get everybody down on the beach. We'll need our own boats and the landing craft from Ketchikan and Kodiak Queen to move in. Assuming our FATPO guests on those vessels will condescend to take orders from mere United States military officers. They'll pick up survivors, always staying to the north side of the wreck. So if the Goots want to fire on them, they'll have to move into our line of fire. This business of using the Ventura as a shield cuts both ways. Day, tell them to start getting those boats in the water. He picked up the radio. Derek, what's your casualty situation like? I can see maybe 100 or so POs on the decks here shooting at the beach. I think maybe half my crew is accounted for, replied Mulvaney. We're not going to be able to stay here much longer. The fire down below is out of control, and the smoke is starting to get really intense up here. The chief engineer also says that explosion ruptured the fuel tanks in the engine room, and we're awash down there with thousands of gallons of diesel. Once that gets ignited, there will be nothing but a hole in the sand. Okay, start getting everybody you can over the port side and onto the beach, ordered Hacker. Get down however you can. Once you're down, set up a defensive perimeter as far away from your ship as possible, in case it does blow. We're sending boats from Higby and the other 2 vessels to pick you up. Our guns will cover the North Beach for you. 554 hours. Could we fire over the Ventura at a high angle and shell the fascists on the South Beach that way? Demanded Captain Sandoval. Might hit a few private houses and any civilians that are still hanging around after all these fireworks, warned Hacker. Fuck 'em, said Sandoval. If they're still here after 3 years of insurrection, they're probably fascists themselves. Hacker shrugged. Fire control. Compute an angle to drop shells in about a 300-yard arc along the dune lines, and about 100 yards behind, and to the south of Ventura. Working on it, sir, said the E5, tapping on his keyboard. 556 hours. On board the Kodiak Queen reporters Edgar Roberts from the BBC and Marcia Minor-Chagan from TV Euro. In Brussels had been thoroughly infuriated at being left out of the shore party based on the Ventura, lowly foreigners that they were. Now they were queasily aware that they might have had a lucky escape, judging from what they could see going down on Sunset Beach, but journalists they were, and they could no more avoid browbeating and haggling with the Queen's captain, William Worley, demanding to go along in one of the rescue boats, than they could avoid breathing. Finally, Worley agreed to let them record the no doubt heroic actions of his crew. He avoided mentioning the fact that he'd had to promise the men triple time for the whole trip to get them to volunteer to man the boats. The Kodiak Queen launched a total of 6 boats, 3 motorized lifeboats, and 3 inflatables, similar to the ill-fated Slitherity. These had already been in the davits, and ready to go to ferry FATPO troops to shore. Now there were 2 sailors in each boat, and a 2-man FATPO machine gun crew with an M60 and a grenade launcher in each one, and in one of the inflatables rode Roberts and Meinertzhagen with 1 cameraman each, cameramen and journalists both green at the gills with fear, but willing to risk their lives for a story. They began heading inshore toward the burning wreck of the Ventura, from which a huge column of black smoke now ascended high into the sky. The rattle of hundreds of weapons from the beach sounded like the static on some monstrous radio, with intermittent muffled explosions, and even from this far out they could see the beach littered with silent, still black figures. 0557 hours. Okay, I see what he's doing, muttered Hatfield. He's getting everybody off the port side of the ferry, and he's going to cover them from the warship while they are recovered from the beach by those boats. Getting about time to be on our way, Cap? Asked Washburn. Yeah, we've made a hell of a splash here today, quite literally, but there's such a thing as pushing your luck, agreed Hatfield. No way I'm exposing our people to that damned cannon and those Gatling guns. They're raising the barrel, pointed out Ekstrom. The barrel of the 76mm gun was indeed rising up to a sharp upward angle, and the turret moved to the right. Shit, cursed Hatfield, they're going to use it like a mortar. He picked up the radio. Straw bosses, boppers, and bangers, listen up. They're going to be lobbing shells over the burning vessel onto your positions. Any moment now. Beat feet, comrades. Don't just scatter like quail, though. Keep it orderly. Company commanders, move your people back to the staging area in sections, and those sections that aren't moving, stay prone until your turn comes to move. Low crawl wherever possible. Shrapnel flies high, so keep your butts down. The gun thundered and spat fire, and a shell arched into the air, and a moment later screamed down into the dunes. Then the gun fell silent. 0558 hours, what the hell? Shouted Hacker. Why isn't it firing? Sensors from the turret just say misfire, sir, said the fire control officer. A fucking dud, raged Hacker. Goddamned Israeli crap. Clear the stoppage, kick the dud into the spank bank, and reload. Not responding, sir, said the E5. Do you want me to reboot the system? It will take a minute, but the reboot should automatically clear the chamber and eject the bad shell. Meryl Sandoval saw a chance to reassert herself, regain control of the situation, and come out of the whole mess a hero to boot. Maybe even cop herself a Congressional Medal of Honor. No time. We have to clear it and reload manually, she said forcefully. I'll do it. Carry on, number 1. I'll call you on the intercom from the turret when the stoppage is clear. She scampered off the bridge. I've never even seen her inside that turret since I came on board, exclaimed Hacker. Not once. Does she even know how to clear it manually? He looked at Day and the fire control officer. They both threw up their hands and shrugged. Sandoval ran down the deck, broke open the hatch into the gun cupola, and stepped inside. She saw the breech of the 76mm cannon lying in its cradle, oddly upright at its high angle. She reached up and grabbed the lever for the breech lock, pulled it down and around, and swung the breech open. Unfortunately, that was not what she should have done. She should have hit the manual eject lever and jacked the dud shell into the extractor tube, then very carefully removed it from the tube and inserted it into one of the padded cylinders on a rack along the bulkhead, which were placed there for the purpose of containing misfires for later disposal. When Meryl Sandoval opened the breech, the dud shell fell out onto the deck with sufficient force so that this time it exploded, detonating the 3 other exposed shells in the loading cage to the left of the breech. The pressure burst cracked the armored turret and sent the gun itself spinning like a top high into the air, descending into the sea with a mighty splash. Meryl Sandoval's pulverized body, every bone broken, was sent whirling backwards out of the open door of the turret and rolling along the deck like a meatball, leaving a red smear behind it, finally coming to rest in an unrecognizable heap by a hatchway entrance. 0559 hours, what the hell was that? Asked Hatfield, stunned, looking at the ruined gun turret that was now pouring smoke. Did we do that? He got on his radio. Guys, Did somebody have a Exocet missile or something they forgot to tell me about? And did any of you just blow up the gun turret on that Coast Guard cutter? There were wild cheers and laughter from behind them as the message was relayed to the volunteers. You know what? I think they did that to themselves, said Len Ekstrom, staring through his own binoculars. Don't ask me how. We seem to be fighting the Three Stooges. Niggers, said Washburn. Some nigger fucked up. The entire bridge crew of the Higby were staring out at the shattered deck and turret and looking down at the sodden mess of meat that had been their captain a minute before. This isn't happening, muttered Hacker in horror. How? What the hell did she do? Jesus God in heaven, moaned Day. Hacker got on the PA system. Damage and firefighting parties to the main turret. He bellowed. On the double, goddammit. Every swinging dick on this ship, get your ass on the bow with every hose, every extinguisher, and get that damned fire out. Body recovery party to the number 2 hatchway. Day spoke up. Sir, those 76 millimeters are armor-piercing shells. They detonate at thousands of degrees, hot enough to actually burn through armor plating on an enemy vessel. I see flames inside that turret, blue and white flames. The very metal of the wiring and the consoles could be on fire. Fire control. How many shells were still in the loading magazine? Demanded Hacker. The rating gulped. 76, sir. An interesting bit of naval history, gentlemen, said Hacker philosophically. Does anyone remember how the German battleship Bismarck sank the British battleship Hood with a lucky shot to the magazine? 0559, 30 hours. A mighty explosion lifted the front half of the U.S.S. Frederick J. Higby clear of the water, and the front bow section from the turret forward broke off. The Higby settled down and began to sink rapidly in about 130 feet of water. On board the incoming boat from Kodiak Queen, which the sailor at the outboard diverted to rescue survivors from the Higby after some argument with the black FATPO lieutenant who wanted to continue on to the beach to pick up his buddies, Roberts and Minor Chagan's cameramen recorded the sinking and the abandoning of the ship, the Coast Guard sailors floating in the cold water of the Northwestern Sea, clinging to bits and pieces of debris, some of them badly burned. 0600 hours, Hatfield and the other two leaped from their dugout. All of a sudden they were all mad, in a frenzy of long-suppressed hatred and bloodlust, all thought of caution and tactics thrown to the wind. Hatfield hollered into the radio, "The cutter's going down. We sank it, or they sank it, or the gods themselves sank it. But now they've got no more choppers and no more warship. Every Northwest volunteer, there's pork on the beach and I'm ringing the dinner bell. Move in by sections, fire and maneuver. Kill them all." 0601 hours. The men busy clambering down the side of the Ventura, or lowering themselves down on davit lines or rope ladders, heard wild cheering coming from the beach. It was the last thing they ever heard, other than the rattling gunfire from the weapons that killed them. Captain Derek Mulvaney was knocked from the sloping deck of his burning vessel by a .50 caliber round. The FATPOs and crew who made it onto the beach were trapped between the burning ship and the encircling volunteers who cut them down. The war wagon roared onto the beach and opened fire with the Browning machine gun on the boats from the other ships that dared to approach the beach, sinking 2 of the inflatables and 1 of the aluminum motor launches, and riddling the rest with holes and dead men. The volunteers moved in slowly, under covering fire from their comrades, until they got in close enough to the disorganized and panicking Americans to use their pistols and knives when they finally ran out of ammunition for their long arms. The media later informed a stunned nation that not one single American invader who set foot on Sunset Beach that day survived. The last 2 American casualties occurred at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the 2 crewmen from the damaged Apache helicopter that crash-landed near Warrenton were seen by an NVA party trying to hitch a ride on Highway 101 South. Captain Ragnar Redbeard and his boys took their heads back to Newport with them as souvenirs. The NVA suffered 3 volunteers killed and 14 wounded, among the dead being Lieutenant Charles Washburn, who was struck in the hip by a 40mm grenade fired from one of the boats that actually made it to the beach and attempted to retrieve survivors. Charlie died immediately afterward in the arms of his 2 lifelong friends and comrades, Zack Hatfield and Leonard Ekstrom. Zack went berserk and waded into the surf up to his hips, firing his Winchester. None of the boat's crew survived. Lieutenant J.G. Charles Day was pulled from the sea by one of the boats and ended up assuming command of the ill-fated expedition. but Captain Worley of the Kodiak Queen ignored his plea to radio for a more senior officer to be helicoptered in. Worley and the captains of the Ketchikan and the tugboats had had enough, and by 8 o'clock in the morning the depleted flotilla was sailing back south to San Francisco. Worley and Day spent several official inquiries and most of the rest of their lives blaming each other for the inglorious retreat. One of the boats that made it back to the Kodiak Queen was the inflatable containing the two shell-shocked European reporters and their cameramen. Eric Roberts and Marcia Meinertagen later collaborated on a best-selling book, Sunrise on Sunset Beach, and went on the Euro talk show circuit. For now, they were both gibbering with terror and exhaustion. Almost as an afterthought, just before their inflatable turned back to the ship with their boatload of survivors from the Higby, both cameramen had taken one last sweep of the beach through their telephoto lenses, and for the second time the 1st Portland Brigade provided posterity with an immortal sound and video bite. The image that went out to hundreds of millions of television viewers, the image that appeared on the cover of both Time and Newsweek and that went down in history, was Zack Hatfield standing on Sunset Beach, dozens of armed figures standing scattered behind him, wreathed in black smoke from the burning ship, dark and sinister and indistinct, like an escort of devils. The beach at their feet was scattered with corpses and visibly red with blood. Zack stood in his feathered slouch hat, his duster flapping in the sea breeze, and he held his Winchester rifle high over his head, an epic gesture of photogenic defiance that became one of the enduring symbols of the Northwest War of Independence. The media were not completely correct in their reports of no survivors. One American military man did make it past the beach alive. Lieutenant Donald Hacker was always a strong swimmer, despite his prosthetic foot, and he also knew that if he went back to California, his head was on the chopping block. He decided to pass, and so when he hit the water, he struck out northward, sometimes diving and swimming underwater to dodge bullets. Finally, he crawled ashore at the edge of Sunset Beach Park. He was creeping through the park trying to make it to the roadway when he was confronted by a young boy and young girl of age 12 and 10 respectively, the son and daughter of Lieutenant Sherry Tomczak, who had been unable to find a babysitter on short notice, and brought them along with instructions to hide in the woods and stay out of trouble. They were both armed with bolt-action rifles, and they marched in thoroughly chagrined and embarrassed Hacker with his hands up right to their mother. When Hatfield showed up, Hacker was sitting on the ground being guarded by the two solemn children with no one saying anything. "You got to be Hatfield in that get-up," said the Coast Guard lieutenant. "Yeah," said Hatfield. "You off that cutter?" "The executive officer, believe it or not," said Hacker in disgust. "What the hell happened with that gun turret of yours blowing up?" asked Zack curiously. "I don't think that was us." Hacker scowled. "Our bird-brained excuse for a captain was an affirmative action quota promotion, a mommy who couldn't sail a rubber duck in a bathtub. Somehow, I have no idea how, she managed to blow up the turret and sink her own ship, if you can believe that. Now I've been captured by the Sesame Street gang here and turned over to a female officer of some kind who offered me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich she made in her own kitchen before coming out here to commit treason and armed insurrection against the United States. I keep hoping this is all a bad dream, and I'll wake up in a nice quiet loony bin somewhere. Hatfield, I've been looking over your crew here. I see kids. I see middle-aged fat guys. I see women. I see Larry the Cable Guy and Dilbert. Some of them are obviously vets from the way they carry themselves and their weapons, but most of them seem to be just average people. How the hell did you do this?" Hatfield reached down, took Hacker's hand, and pulled him to his feet. "Come and meet some of them. I'll show you." The official press briefing in Washington, D.C. took place at noon Pacific Time, 3:00 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The footage from Sunset Beach was now all over the world, and the bloody death of General Rollins had been replayed on the air at least 1,000 times already in the United States alone. The White House press secretary came out to address the assembled media, standing at the podium with an ashen face. He was ashen because he had just come from the Oval Office where he had been on the receiving end of one of Hillary Clinton's deranged and hysterical tirades. These tirades sometimes ended with Hillary pushing a button beneath her desk, summoning her picked bodyguard of black and Hispanic secret service agents, pointing at some unfortunate bureaucrat or other recipient of her ire and commanding, "Take that traitor away." His predecessor as press secretary had suffered such a fate. The man's body was found several days later in a public park in Northern Virginia, an alleged suicide in the classic Vince Foster manner. Hillary didn't believe in changing a winning formula. The press secretary opened a sheet of paper and read a prepared statement in a dull monotone into the microphone. The Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security regret to announce that a disastrous engagement has taken place between elements of the federal anti-terrorist police organization, the United States Coast Guard, and the terrorist Northwest Volunteer Army on Sunset Beach in the state of Oregon. The terrorists, in overwhelming numbers, launched a highly disciplined assault, which has resulted in the loss of the Coast Guard cutter U.S.S. Frederick J. Higby, the civilian contracted transport ship U.S.S. Ventura, and the death or capture of 457 men and women of the FATPO, the Coast Guard, civilian contractors, and representatives of the media, notably the officer commanding General Roland Rollins, and Mr. Leonard Posner of Fox News. There have also been a number of wounded. The remaining vessels in the expeditionary force are returning to base. He then turned and walked off stage, ignoring the frantic shouting and demands that he answer questions. The NVA's official response was simpler and even more dramatic. That afternoon, over 2,000 journalists, television stations, newspapers, and news outlets across America received an email containing a special confirmation code word. The message consisted solely of 3 short lines from Shakespeare's King Henry V, Act 4, Scene 8. "O God, thy arm was here, and not to us, but to thy arm alone ascribe